Welcome to the Mystic Fool's Journey podcast. I'm Anna, and this is Ruth.
Howdy.
This is an occult history podcast, and today we're diving into love spells. Let's jump on in.
Okay, let's do it up. I am pretty excited to talk about the history of love spells. I think it's a fun topic because there's so many different grimoires and historical magical texts that contain love spells that we can talk about and really dive into. And they're all slightly different from one another, which is kind of fun. And that's just kind of the fun part for me about this whole dang thing, is just learning about how we came up with these spells and why they're still so prominent today. It's just fun thing to dive into. But I think it'd probably be wise to stay at the very top of the episode so we don't have to keep caveating.
Yeah.
The kind of love spells we're going to talk about from history today definitely aren't the kind of love spells that respect the autonomy of others.
Nope, not
We're
at all.
Definitely here just to talk and have a good time about more of the anthropological side of love spells. So don't take anything we say today as glorifying this sort of stuff.
I feel like every episode we do is going to always have some weird caveat at the very beginning.
Right?
We don't condone this. There's some weird stuff. And you'll see why. It's going to get kind of icky at some point. Yeah, because I've never encountered a love spell in pop culture or on TikTok even that really respects the autonomy of others. I even get weird. I don't personally even like tarot readings that are about trying to predict what other people are doing.
Same.
I'm you should probably communicate with that person rather than guess. And they're not obviously the most reputable of sources, pop culture, which is probably where you've seen things like love potions, like in Harry Potter or Charmed. I'm pretty sure Bewitched. I'm sure all of those have some version of it.
Oh, yeah.
But, for better or for worse, that's what people are getting their info from, is pop culture and TikTok. And spells in general, not just love spells. So here we are. We're going to dive into it, and you'll see why some of these are definitely not great for many reasons.
Yeah, and no judgment. I mean, I get most of my news from the talking head fish on TikTok, the SpongeBob fish. So we're not judging you here.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But I think the intention behind this sort of stuff has definitely changed over time, though. As we roll into the modern era, love spells are still hanging around, but they've changed with the times. Nowadays, people from various spiritual and neo-pagan traditions are all about giving these spells a personal touch. They borrow bits and pieces from their own cultures and beliefs to make it their own. And take modern witchcraft, for instance. Love spells have become tools for personal growth and empowerment. It's not about controlling someone else's feelings anymore. It's more about boosting self-love and fostering healthy relationships. Ethical considerations are a lot more nuanced these days, for sure, with a big focus on consent and respect in matters of the heart. So it's like the love spells have grown up with us.
No, I love that concept. I was like, that's good. That's good to hear. It feels better that way. So while we love delving into the history of where different magical and spiritual practices come from and how they were used, in my opinion, we should always be evolving those practices to better fit and serve the type of society we want to live in. So it's good that they're growing up with us. I do see plenty of people on TikTok who are more about autonomy and not affecting other people, but there's still others out there who don't. But, for other examples, it's kind of hey, you know how animal sacrifice was used a lot? Now that we're expanding animal rights, as well as eliminating things that are just unhygienic or a biohazard, like blood. Just blood in general is not necessarily hygienic to use in rituals. We're evolving our magical practices and spiritual practices along with the society that we would like to see, which is great. I think that's how most of this should go, in my opinion.
For sure.
And we'll probably, I hope, at some point we do a little episode on chaos magic, because I'm pretty sure that what I'm about to say is kind of inspired by chaos magic without me knowing much about it. But my personal view is that the intention behind the spells are what's important. It doesn't matter if you use blood, but if you need to use something red or something that represents what blood would have represented for you, it's not about the objects or ingredients themselves. It's about the intention behind them that makes it powerful.
For sure.
So yeah, I think that's a chaos magic thing, but that's a different episode. For now, let's get into some love spells.
Let's get into some love spells for sure. So, everybody, if you're keeping track, everything starts in ancient Egypt.
Oh no. I mean, that's what we have evidence of. There's other stuff, other places that we just don't know about.
Yes, for sure. The first ones to start writing this stuff down, for sure. So yeah, our journey begins in ancient times where love spells had already woven their way into the fabric of human existence. In ancient Egypt, for instance, love spells were inscribed on tablets and placed in the tombs, and they believed that love could extend into the afterlife. That's exciting. It's like the Golden Bachelor, but one step beyond. That'd be kind of fun.
I have not seen that, and so I don't know what the Golden Bachelor
It's incredible. It's old people falling in love, and it will put your faith back into humanity. It's so
That's
good.
Sweet.
But I'd love to see an afterlife version of The Bachelor for sure.
That's the next level. That's once we can finally tune in officially.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But these enchantments often invoked the names of love and fertility deities, such as Hathor and Isis.
We love them. They're big and popular. So both Hathor and Isis, for those who don't know, have a long and rich history. I'll try and keep it short, but I ramble sometimes. So it starts with cattle.
What?
Yeah, hear me out. Cattle are beloved and considered sacred in Egypt. We've talked about how cultures, whatever was around them in nature, inspired their myths and what was sacred to them because cattle provided nourishment for many reasons. Milk, meat, they also helped work the land. So they often represented fertility, motherhood, and creation. Mehet Weret is a divine bovine known as the celestial cow who burst the sun at the beginning of time and caused the Nile River to flood, which resulted in a proliferation of life and fertilized the crops. So I think we can see how this is all relating to love and fertility now.
For sure.
Yeah, Hathor was popping. She was a really big goddess before Isis. We'll get into that shortly. Hathor is often associated with this celestial bovine. And she's depicted either with a cow's head, as a pure white cow, or very often as a woman with a crown shaped like two horns of a cow with a solar disc in between them.
I've seen that one, for sure.
Yeah, pretty much everybody has probably seen Hathor and just not realized it.
Oh, okay.
So she was considered the cosmic mother. She was a sky goddess, a solar goddess, goddess of pleasure, love, fertility, dancing. She was invoked to help spirits enter the afterlife. She had a lot. She was not one thing. She was multifaceted. And she was super popular. She was very beloved. And Egyptian beliefs of the afterlife even transformed around her. So OG, original, people who died and were worthy of paradise were often thought to transform into Osiris and a likeness of him, regardless of gender. Anybody who died and was worthy of paradise, it was like, you are now in the likeness of Osiris. But over time, it shifted so that women worthy of paradise would take the likeness of Hathor because she was just so popular. Everybody loved her. So sacred. So Isis is a younger deity who we are probably all way more familiar with because she shows up way more in pop culture than Hathor does.
Mm-hmm.
And she still originated in the Nile Delta, that Nile area. But to TLDR this, Isis eventually became more widely worshipped, especially once Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, and Egyptian deities were exported to the Greeks and Romans.
Okay.
So, it's one of those, hey, we exported, look at all this cool stuff, look at these cool goddesses, and, eventually over time, Isis would be combined with Hathor and took over many of Hathor's traditional roles. In addition to her own roles that were added on over time, Isis eventually became not just mother and fertility and healing, but also a goddess of harbors and safe passage over the seas.
Oh, very cool.
So these two deities, Isis started out as her own, but she eventually, we talked about syncretism, took over Hathor's roles, was adopted and transformed by the Greeks and Romans as well. But they all started with this whole I am the divine mother, creation comes from me. So a lot of love spells invoke her. And we've even found poetry written about I need to find my, poetry written in hieroglyphs in ancient Egyptian. That's I need to find my lover. And they would cry out to Hathor or to Isis to help them find their husband or their partner.
Cool. Man, I freaking love this shit. This is dope.
This
is why we're doing the pod, man. This is so sick.
Knowledge.
Yeah, so then in ancient Greece and Rome, practitioners sought to harness the power of the gods like Aphrodite and Venus to rekindle romantic flames. Rituals, prayers, and charms were used to entice love interests. It was a reflection of the belief that love was a divine force that could be called upon through magical incantations. We know about this because of something called the magical papyri, Did I say that right, Anna?
I think you did. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not
great.
I'm not an expert, but that's how I would have said it.
Papyri, which is a bunch of ancient texts that contain a bunch of info about magical spells and rituals and stuff that provides a lot of insight into ancient magic in the Mediterranean world.
Oh, yeah. So if you're going to look it up and be nerds like us and Google, you can either look up Greek magical papyri, but it's also called the PGM for short. And Ruth means it, which she says it spans a lot of different cultures.
Oh,
like
for
languages.
sure. It's
yeah, like languages,
extensive.
cultures. It goes over, I think, it's hundreds of magical rituals that existed over the course of several centuries. So I think it's
It feels very much like a living and breathing document.
It is. Yeah, basically every time they find something new, a lot of times there's like certain criteria and it'll just get added. That new thing will just get added to the PGM where you're like, look, we found some more magic.
So sick.
Add it, slide it in. And so I think it's like from the hundreds BC to 400s CE is kind of like the current span of the documents. Old, super old.
So old. What does CE even stand for?
Common Era. So
okay.
CE is the new version of AD.
Oh, really? So, okay. Very
so
cool.
BCE is before the Common Era. Whereas so like BC and AD were like the Latin versions and they essentially meant like before Christ and like after Christ.
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to seem wrong if I was wrong.
No, I mean, honestly, that's fine. People should correct us if we are wrong anyways. It's about learning. But yeah,
sure.
BCE and CE are the like not religious, like the agnostic way of saying BC and AD.
That's
but it's
cool.
still
I appreciate the separation that they're trying to go for.
They're trying. Yeah, they're trying. But yeah, so this is just like the PGM is just a portion of what existed because one, stuff deteriorates over time. We've been over that. So there's stuff we're never going to find again. But two, and probably more importantly, the various ruling political systems would destroy local artifacts and texts to erase and suppress local religions. We've also been over that. Yeah, super
Very
lame. So there's this one account where Roman Emperor Augustus is recorded to have burned over 2,000 texts that included prophecies and magical rituals. So we've already, we know we've lost at least 2,000 other texts that we could have found.
So shitty. Bummer.
Yeah. Luckily, though, papyrus is super durable, and we have translations of these surviving texts. There's actually a PDF online you can download.
Cool.
There's spells for invisibility in there. It's wild.
I love the world we live in. It's amazing.
Wild. So great reference for syncretism, and it spans so many cultures, so it helps us track these rituals and magical spells over time.
I feel like we should come up with a little jingle theme song to play whenever syncretism is coming into play.
Right? It's a big one.
It is. So anyways, this is such a fun little text to dive into for love spells because it has so many different options to choose from potions to make, incantations to Eros and Aphrodite, instructions for creating amulets and also binding spells. It feels like a choose your own adventure for love spells.
I feel like we should make that. I would buy that. I'd buy a modern version of that.
Right? I know. That would be a great little idea. So moving forward in time, we arrive in the medieval and Renaissance eras, where love spells intertwined with folk magic. Cunning folk and wise women were often consulted for advice on matters of the heart. The magic of love was seen as a crucial aspect of life, and herbal remedies, charms, and incantations were used to navigate the complexities of romantic relationships. That part kind of bummed me out a little bit, just because it's oh, yeah, I guess I do remember that back in the day, your relationship as a woman was kind of, life or death for you in a way.
This is the bummer about a lot of things that deal with a lot of magical things. When we talk about spells and potions specifically, where you're trying to exert control, it's the fact that you don't have control that a lot of people will in history you'll see start to turn back towards magic to try and gain control. You're losing autonomy in some way. So for women, it was your future depended on your husband, and that's a lot. Your life is riding on who you marry.
Yeah, that's for sure. So anyways, picture this. We're back in the day of Shakespeare, and folks are dabbling in some real funky magic. One example is the Book of Secrets of Albertus Magnus. Now, this book is said to be the work of Albertus Magnus?
It's Magnus.
Magnus.
You switched the N and the G. It's fine.
Okay. He's a German Dominican friar who was also a philosopher, scientist, and even a bishop. Yes, even this esteemed Catholic saint had his magical moments. Truly, I mean, I feel like we've talked about this a lot too, like, people just picked what their job was back then.
Oh my gosh, there's so, like, we have so many more criteria that, like, that people are forced to follow in order to qualify for any kind of industry that, like, this is wild. One of my great-grandfathers was, like, a teacher, and we found his, like, certificate of, like, here's your certificate that shows you can teach. And the things he's listed that he's allowed to teach for is, like, 20 lines long.
That's
like,
so
hey,
crazy.
You're, like, educated now, so you must be able to teach all of this stuff. And you're like, oh, there's no guidelines. There wasn't a lot.
No, it's true. And I just wonder, like, so he's a philosopher, a scientist, and a bishop, and also dabbled in magic. Were these, like, hobbies that he monetized? Did he, like, incorporate all of these into his 9-to-5 each day? Like, what was the breakdown? I want to see your time blocking schedule.
I want to see a pie chart.
Right.
I feel like we can broadly say that because things hadn't been developed, like, science wasn't, like, it hadn't been fully separated from philosophy and astrology and magic, like, because everything was still blended and people hadn't formed these rigid rules around what philosophy versus science versus magic was.
Right.
It just kind of was all blended together. It's kind of like as we talk about any kind of religion and its evolution, like, bits of the magic past, of the folklore, they start to, like, weave their way into it and, like, survive over time. Like, we talked about candle magic a little bit and how, like, well, we light candles to saints in churches. And it's like, where do you think these original rituals came from? Like, they're just gonna keep showing up. It's gonna take a long time before things like, fully cut off. Yeah,
that's for sure. And I suppose everything was the church at some point back in the day. It's all tricky. So anyways, inside the book, you've got some pretty wild spells, and they give us a glimpse into the kind of magical know-how that was floating around during Shakespeare's time. These spells were kind of like the OG love potions, and one of them is a real gem. It involves mashing up earthworms with periwinkle and feeding it to your other half. Supposedly, it's supposed to crank up the affection between you two, but honestly, it's probably more likely to give you a tummy ache.
The thought of someone, here's where we're talking about autonomy again.
Right,
the thought of someone putting worms into my food would have the opposite effect of making me love them. Like,
absolutely
disgusting. I would run the opposite direction. Also, in general, please always research anything before eating it. So the other thing to remember is that now we live in a society. We live in a time when we have access to a lot of non-native plants and plant life. So it's really important to check if something is edible. So at this point in time, periwinkle, there's several different, like, varieties of periwinkle, right? And there are two that are not toxic. It won't, like, hurt you if you eat them. But there is one version of periwinkle, the flower, that is highly toxic.
Oh.
And so now that, like, now that we have access to plants that are just shipped to us from overseas, like, don't do it. Don't eat it. Please research anything you put before you put it into your mouth, because these aphrodisiacs could turn very deadly. And we'll see that some did. In the future of this episode, you will see.
So gross. So back in the Middle Ages, though, using animal bits was totally normal in these love spells. I'm talking snake fat, sparrow heads, bat blood, pigeon hearts. They'd throw all kinds of stuff into the mix.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to talk about the Spanish fly, which is actually a blister beetle. It's not a fly, and it's not Spanish. Whatever. That's a different story. I don't even know what that is. But it's a blister beetle, which is already a bad start to this because this beetle excretes a blistering agent. So if you touch it, your skin will actually blister. Like, it'll just full on blister. But this beetle would be ground up and used as an aphrodisiac. So people who ate it or were unknowingly fed it could risk blistering their mouth and esophagus. But also, that blistering agent causes irritation and inflammation internally, specifically to your, like, urinary tract. So blood rushes to your genitals, which at first makes people seem like they're hot and heavy. Like, yes, of course this is an aphrodisiac. You're, like, ready to go. Right. But really, it's your body, like, trying to fight off this blistering agent. And this inflammation that it can cause to like your gastrointestinal tract can like be fatal, like vomiting, nausea, and some people died because they were poisoned with this essentially. But it was all for love, right?
Yeah, truly. The lengths some people will do just to get laid.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's really amazing.
It's a lot.
We are simple creatures.
It's very simple. Like, that's a good thing to keep in mind.
So fast forward now to the 16th century in Italy, you've got Pietro Biro, a physician who's got his own love tips. He says carrying a Biral stone will crank up the love vibes between a couple. And get this, if a couple's going through a rough patch, a magnet might just patch things up. But here's the kicker. If you want more epic smooches, he recommends catching swallows born in August, tossing them up in a big old pan, and baking them until they're dried up. Then you turn them into a powder and give it to the lovebirds. Yeah, that was totally a thing. Love sure makes people do some quirky things, doesn't it?
Just so much. Also, it's a beryl stone. The magnet and the beryl probably sound like the safest love charms.
I know.
So far.
Those ones I was like, okay, in terms of, autonomy and love spells, just putting a stone between you two, that's fine. Go for it. Harmless.
Cool. Great. Yeah, there's something to me, though, when it comes to, like, using murder as a means to instill love that just doesn't, like, sit right with me. You're like, go kill these baby birds and then eat them. And you're like, this is not the foundation of love that I was looking for. This is not.
I know.
This doesn't seem great. Basically, all these recipes should come with, like, a Surgeon General's warning that's just like, if you or a loved one is considering a love spell or potion, please consult your local physician and therapist. Side effects may include vomiting, diarrhea, violating the free will of others, and an unhealthy psychological fixation. Like, it's just
That's
a lot.
incredible. Yeah, for sure.
Oof.
Oh, yeah. We definitely need some warning labels on these things.
For sure.
But in the good old days of the Renaissance, love spells were all about mixing a bit of romance with astrology, actually. People thought that the stars and planets could mess with our love lives, so they'd time their love spells to sync up with what the stars were doing. It was like looking for the universe's nod of approval for your love potion, which is similar to what we do today.
I was going to say, there's that TikTok filter where, like, they're like, put in the birth dates of you and your loved one for the moon.
I know, I wanted to do it.
The moon. I was like, I don't want to do it because everybody says weird stuff about how they match up.
I know, yeah. And what happens if you don't match up? I would just be like, oh, bummer. I'd rather not now.
I don't want to do it.
So the 19th and 20th centuries witnessed a continued fascination with love spells. In the Victorian and Edwardian eras, Edwardian. Oh, well, that's fun to say.
It is.
Charms and amulets took center stage, with people turning to trinkets and talisman to attract or maintain love.
So this might be an interesting time to mention that there used to be love rituals associated with Halloween in this era.
Ooh.
So, yeah, in the early 1900s, there were rituals young women might use to try and predict or divine who their future spouse would be. And these parlor games were actually written about in newspapers around, like, Halloween time. Like, newspapers would put out, like, here's the rituals of how to find your future husband. One game required folks to go outside, pluck a hair from their head, recite an incantation, and when the hair is released, it supposedly will fly in the direction where their true love is. And there's several other ones. There's several rituals that involve apples. And that goes back to the whole, like, apples have been a sign of, like, the harvest during this time of year. So
sure.
Yeah. So, of course, like, they've survived. There's, like, one where, like, you peel the apple, and if you throw it over your left shoulder, the peel will spell the name of your true love.
Fun!
Yeah. There's another one where you, like, burn nuts over a fire. I've seen a couple different versions of it when I was researching it, but, like, you could write multiple names on, like, hazelnuts, and you'd put them into the fire, and the one that burns to ash is a good match, but if they pop, they're not a good match. Like,
oh, that's so funny.
And then also walking backwards while looking into a mirror and reciting an incantation will supposedly reveal the face of your true love.
Fun.
Yeah.
You know, there's one aspect of this that I don't think we have covered in this episode, and it's how much of this is actually driven by teenagers.
I think that there's a lot. Yes, I did read when I was reading about these Halloween rituals. There's another ritual that has to do with holding a dumb supper. which is where you are silent, and it's one version of a dumb supper, but you essentially set a place for someone who's not there. And it's supposedly, in this particular instance, it's the person you're going to marry. And like, there's like all these superstitions that like if somebody barges in at a certain time, depending on who they are, they might be your true love, or they might be like a portent of death. Like
only a teenager would do that.
Exactly. And it's like there were definitely stories of it's like clearly when like kids knew other kids were doing this, they would intentionally like barge in during the supper to like rile things up.
Fun. It's so fun.
It is fun. Aside from the fact that it was about women trying to control their destiny. But besides that,
yeah.
We could do that. Let's
surface level fun.
Surface level fun. But yeah, anyways, Halloween eventually took a turn clearly away from romantic divination. Likely because women began to have more agency and autonomy to determine their life and future. So yeah, and then it became about kids and candy instead.
That's fun. It was like, the dark version of Valentine's Day.
It basically, yes.
So love magic was also intricately connected to spiritualism, which gained immense popularity during this time. Spirit mediums and seances sometimes incorporated love spells into their practices. Back in the day, spirit mediums and seances were all the rage, and they weren't just about communicating with the dearly departed. These spiritual gatherings sometimes took a romantic turn, as love spells found their way into the mix. Spirit mediums were folks believed to have a direct line to the spirit world. People flocked to them for all sorts of reasons, including matters of the heart. Some believed that spirits from beyond could help people with love troubles, whether it was finding a soulmate, rekindling a lost love, or even causing somebody to fall head over heels in love. During seances where people gathered to communicate with the dead, the mediums sometimes incorporated love spells or rituals into the proceedings. These love spells often involved incantations, candles, and other mystical tools to invoke the spirits and seek their assistance in matters of love. It was a mix of supernatural and lovey-dovey, where the line between the living and the departed got a bit blurry. And folks were looking for some ghostly guidance in their love lives.
Ooh.
Hold on to your hats, folks, because the adventure is far from finished.
Oh, boy.
You wouldn't believe this. Some brainy folks over at University of Oxford are tossing around the idea of creating what they call love drugs. Yeah, that's right. Drugs that could, in theory, give relationships a boost. And get this, they're even toying with the idea of anti-love drugs that could help ease the pain of heartbreak, like breakups or like one-sided love situationships. It's literally like we're living in a sci-fi movie.
I think this is I was like, I was reading some stuff about this. I was like, I can't tell how I feel about this. Like on one hand, I could totally as long as everything's autonomous, I guess it's up to you, right? It's just like, cool, if you want to take these drugs to do this thing, to either like ease your heartbreak or like keep your marriage going, fine. It's just also like really upsetting at the same time to be like, if someone gets their hands on these and uses them on someone else, it's not cool. I do think that this is like an interesting example of how like magic slowly being transformed by science, because now that we know basically some of the root of these like love drugs is that we now can like identify the chemicals in our brain that are what boost, like what make us feel love, like oxytocin and serotonin and all those different things, and how they combine specifically to make us feel this way or feel like attached and pair bonded to another person. So it is really interesting. It's like, cool, this thing that love spells were always trying to do could now physically actually be done because of science, and it's like that magic into science, like bleeds into science, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. That always ends up happening in the end in a lot of situations for sure. And this is definitely one of them. What's interesting too is just like with love spells, and definitely caveating that we now all have, power over our own lives more so than back in medieval times as women. All of these things can be, achieved naturally. Like if you're using love spells for self-confidence or something like that,
right?
Like communication and that sort of thing will get you there faster and, and provide you a more solid ground. And if you're taking love drugs for like, keep your marriage of 20 years alive, hey, no judgment here, but, there's other ways to achieve that will be, more sustainable long-term and provide you inaccurate. It's just so
Yeah.
weird to think that we might be able to take a drug that boosts love between us. I mean, I guess we got Viagra.
Yeah, I mean, that's the aphrodisiac side of things,
Right.
for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like it's one of those things where I personally think that there's always something to do in addition to medicine. You know, it's kind of like, hey, if you're healing from an illness, yes, take your antibiotics, but you should also be getting enough sleep and eating healthy. It's that kind of same. I guess it's a holistic look at things, if I'm using that word correctly.
Right.
But it's the same with mental health. It's like, yes, I can take these pills to help manage my symptoms, but there's probably some structures and routines and other like health habits I need in place. Like maybe I need to go to a therapist to make sure I'm talking this and working this out. Maybe I need to make sure I'm exercising every day to keep my brain on top of things. Like, it's one of those things where, like, I am concerned that people are once again just going to turn to a pill to fix things rather than what you're saying is, like, also treat the root cause. Like, why don't you feel connected to your loved one?
Right.
Are you talking? Are you sharing moments together? Or are you just, like, living in separate rooms in a house together? Like, that is very important to look at everything rather than just, hey, take a pill and it's fixed. And you're like, you didn't really fix it. And that's not you're not, like, especially if you're like raising kids, it's not like a great habit to be like, just take a pill and it fixes things. You're like,
that's for sure.
Should probably work through some of the tough stuff in the old-fashioned way as well. Like, you know, combine the two.
Well, join us for our Naturopathy podcast launching next week, where Ruth and Anna solve all your problems.
Talk to two not doctors about what they think about your life.
So this was a great episode, but don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If you're a fan of the podcast, we need you to do this so we can find new fans. I think we're actually personally working on a drug of our own sorts that makes you all subscribe to our podcast.
Yep, definitely.
So tell your friends, follow us on all socials. Our handles are Sweet Death Inc. and Mystic Fool Tarot on all platforms. See you later.
Bye.